All right, thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to us today. My name, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeff Kubiak. I'm a professor of practice in the School of Politics and Global Studies here at ASU, where I co-direct an MA in Global Security. I'm also a senior fellow at the ASU Center on the Future of War. Today I have a great pleasure of talking with and you listening to one of my colleagues, Peter W. Singer. Peter, first and foremost, in my book, is a professor of practice as well here at ASU and teaches in our MA in global security. Is one of the great minds behind our cybersecurity concentration. But Peter is also a strategist and senior fellow at New America, where he's been named by the Smithsonian as one of the nation's 100 leading innovators and by Foreign Policy as one of the top 100 global thinkers. Peter is the author of multiple best-selling, award-winning books. I remember I met Peter for the very first time back in 2004 when he was working at Brookings, and he was talking to a group of Air Force fellows about his latest work and the corporate warriors. He was talking about private military industrial complex even as early as 2004, well before it became an issue for the wider audiences. And the next time I came across his work was his book, Wired for War, The Robotics Revolution, the Conflict in the 21st Century. Absolutely rocked my world. It seemed so futuristic, and yet it was very compelling in that it was really right here, right now. And of course, many of you already are familiar with the book, his latest nonfiction book, Like War, which has really kind of reshaped the conversation about the information age and the weaponization of information. Peter has, and I've told him this too, Peter has the ability to see the near future, especially, but the future in general, much more clearly than most, and has us ready for an even more intense story with his latest novel, he and August Cole, in the book where he'll talk about today, which is his book, BurnIn. So Peter, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time, and we're glad to have you.
Oh, first, thank you for that incredibly kind introduction. These are really generous and appreciate it. And also just want to thank everybody for virtually coming out and joining. It's, the ASU community, it's rich, and it's what's great, so inviting for all of us, whether we're in Arizona or not. So really do appreciate that. What I'm going to talk today about is this new book, but my guess from having experienced a lot of these webinars and the like is that at some point you're going to get tired of looking at me. So hopefully the technology is going to allow us here for me to be able to share with you a PowerPoint of some visuals. And give me a thumbs up, Jeff, if you're seeing that. Awesome. Okay. So the starting point for this talk today is actually a book that Jeff mentioned, and is again, just incredibly kind introduction there. A little over a decade back, I had a book come out called Wired for War. And Wired for War explored how robots, these things from science fiction, are actually starting to be used in our real wars in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. For example, the U.S. military force that went into Iraq in 2003 had a handful of, we call them unmanned aerial systems. If you're in the Air Force, you call them remotely piloted aircraft. The rest of us call them drones. So we had only a handful. None of them were armed. On the ground, the invasion force had 0 unmanned ground vehicles or systems. Today, the U.S. military, by one measure, has over 22,000 unmanned systems in it. And of course, many of them armed, but we're not the only ones. Nations that range from adversaries like Russia and China to allies like Great Britain and Australia are all now not only using unmanned systems, but wrestling with the questions of everything from how do you buy them? How do you train for them? What's the best doctrine? To larger questions as they relate to the topic of this center. What do they mean for the future of war and peace? In fact, can you be at war, but not at war in the same old way? When you think about the notion of the so-called drone wars that have taken place everywhere from Pakistan to right now in East Africa. Now, that's where we were back then. What's happened since? Well, when it comes to the technology, we've seen it blossom out into all sorts of different forms. And in many ways, it's changing not just in the forms, but how we think about it. We used to, even the way we called it, unmanned. It was a lot like horseless carriage. What it's not, what it's replacing, rather than what it is, automobile, or in this case, robot. And as you move beyond thinking about that way, it also means in your designs, you stop, building around the old man platform, just swapping out taking out the seats in the cockpit. And instead, you get lots of different forms, but you also get, therefore, wildly different sizes. They might be incredibly small, or they might be massively huge, the size of several houses put together. But maybe more important, though, is not in their form on the hardware side that's changing, but on the software side. This is an image of the Navy's MQ-25. It's the new system that is better than the previous generation of drones. Just like you would measure planes in the past, it flies faster, it flies further, but it's better in a different way. It's more intelligent. It's more autonomous. It's able to do more on its own. It's able to do very complex tasks, like, for example, take off and land from an aircraft carrier, which any Navy pilot will happily tell you is the toughest human pilot task of all. But it also will take on roles that range from air-to-air refueling to surveillance to, if we're being honest, it's going to be in a strike role. The point is, we're not in a world where they're out there doing everything on their own like the Terminator, but we are seeing a change in the human role relative to our machines, including our robotic machines. We're moving geographically, where you might have a pilot sitting in Nevada, or there's a base in Arizona, but the plane that they're flying is over Afghanistan. But the human role is not just changing geographically, it's changing temporally. As you move from remote operation to them doing more on their own, there's a human role, but it's not at the point of time of the action. It's actually further back. The human role that matters may be when it was decided to deploy the system, or maybe even earlier, the months or even years earlier when the human role was writing the software for it. Now, that change is huge. But my sense is that there's a larger change going on, and it's an important story, not just in technology today, but arguably one of the most important stories in all of human history. Everything that we've seen play out on the military side is playing out on the civilian side even greater. You can see it in everything from factory industrial robotics, 300% growth period, to software. AI has been something that was dreamed of in Arthur C. Clarke's 2001. Well, from 2001 in the real world to today, we've seen AI disrupt everything from finance to medicine. But we're only at the start of this. There is no other area that is seen as much promise, is being funded as deeply, is being supported by as diverse an array of players as the space where the cutting edge of hardware and software come crashing together. For example, one measure saw $153 billion worth of spending with an annual creative disruption impact of $33 trillion. The participants, they range from the leading governments of the world. It might be the U.S. National Defense Strategy that talks about the importance of AI, to China's government strategy. It says, no, we want to be the world leader in AI by the year 2030. It's on the business side. Pretty much every single Fortune 500 company out there is plowing not just millions, but billions into it. They're the expected tech companies, the Google, the Microsoft, the Amazons, the Baidus. But it's also non-tech companies, or what used to be non-tech companies, but are now. For example, both John Deere and McDonald's recently bought up one of the most promising AI startups, respectively. That's because they believe that the future of tractors and the future of fast food runs through AI. Now, that point about startups being bought out by the big guys also points to what's playing out among the companies that want to be those big guys. The founder of Wired magazine put it this way, quote, "I think the formula for the next 10,000 startups is to take something that already exists and add AI to it. And yet, all those trends are only going to go faster because of what's played out over the last several months. Uh, the trends towards automation and AI and robotics, they were already there before coronavirus, but all the data points to them being drastically accelerated by it. You know, think about it this way. We have in some areas, we've pushed forward to a level that we didn't think we would ever be at. The amount of distance learning to the amount of distance work that played out. In other areas, the scale is where we thought we would be, but not for a long time. For example, telemedicine is a field that I'm pretty familiar with because of family. Telemedicine field, they, in a couple of weeks, moved forward to where the industry thought it would be 10 years from now. On the physical side, we're seeing robotics rolled out into roles that range from policing curfews to cleaning subways and hospitals to delivering groceries, you name it, to the AI surveillance of society. Wow, we are scaling that up to, frankly, beyond what not just science fiction, but even the Chinese government imagined it would be putting into place. The point of this is, after this outbreak is hopefully done with, we're not going back 100%. So if we're headed into what's been excitingly termed everything from a new industrial age to it's second machine age, fourth industrial revolution, there's lots of different terminologies for it. I think there's three questions though that we're going to have to figure out how to work out. And going back to the notion of the pandemic, we're gonna have to figure them out a lot more rapidly. The first is, what will be the impact of all this automation on the economy and all that ripples out from the economy, society, politics, family, you name it. Now, while a lot of people feel that new technologies lead to new jobs and new opportunities, the data shows, though, that we will see job displacement and even replacement on a massive scale. This is what happens when you rewire the economy. The estimates of this extend. We actually built a database. So for the students in the group, this is what you do. And actually some Arizona State students helped with this. We tried to pull out every job report prediction that's out there. And read through them, but also a student put them into a massive Excel spreadsheet. You get to see the distribution of these estimates, and it's fantastically interesting. For example, Oxford University looked at 702 different job occupations and found that 47% of total US employment is at risk for replacement or reduction by robotics and AI within the next 2 decades. Now, McKinsey, the consulting company, looks at the same trend and says, no, Oxford, that's a wild overestimate. We only think it's 45%. PricewaterhouseCoopers says, no, man, McKinsey, you're so off. We looked at it. Our data, our approach is better. We found 38%. This data set actually has 1,300 plus of these in there, and the low end is OECD at 9%. 9% of jobs being replaced or displaced is still a really big deal, again, for the economy, but for society writ large. And so even if you take the most optimistic view that somehow everybody who's displaced finds a job, which is a pretty unlikely scenario because one, you have a delay, that transition period. You also have the fact that this is a different kind of industrial revolution. The tool is not just, swapping out shovel for a farmer to hammer for someone working on a factory assembly line to, now they sit behind a computer. No, this tool is intelligent. So it takes on some of the roles of the worker themselves. But the point is, the magnitude of this shift is historic, however you cut it, and not just on the economy. As the director of MIT's Media Lab put it, quote, every area of life will be affected. Every single one, end quote. And think about what that means. The last industrial revolution was a story of new economic winners, but also economic losers at every single level, at the individual level, at the industry level, at the regional level, which part of the United States, to even the global level. It's part of the story of the rise of the United States as a great power. From that, you saw all sorts of ripple effects. You saw positives like no industrial revolution, no mass consumer goods. You also saw negative effects, global climate change from that same outcome. You see mass political movements and new concepts. No industrial revolution, no good things like children's rights, workers' rights, women's rights. No industrial revolution, you also probably don't get fascism and communism, which would drive conflict in politics for the next rough century. So the point is, we've got all that playing out. But we have another second dilemma. Every time you get a new technology, you get new questions of law, policy, ethics that spin out from it. It's always been the case. I think in war, the bow and arrow, and it was actually, they tried to ban it a little over 1,000 years back. But you also have that story with the airplane. You have that story with computers. We have the cybersecurity specialty. Think of all the issues that have rolled out of cybersecurity and cyber war. That'll happen here. But we also have layers of questions that we've never really dealt with before. And there's roughly 3 types. The first is machine permissibility. What is that tool that's increasingly intelligent and independent allowed to do on its own? And under what circumstances, and who can decide, all that kind of stuff. The second issue is machine accountability. Who owns that intelligent machine and all that it does? Who owns, for example, profits from what it does, what information it collects, but also who owns it in the sense of who takes accountability when things don't work out the way that we planned. And then finally is the issue of machine rights. Not just what can the machines do, but what can we do to the machines? And this is a weird, wild space that brings in everything from sex bots to the US military. The US Air Force, for example, has taken the position that our drones have a, quote, inherent right of self-defense. That is, if someone else shoots at our drones, they have the legal right, as if they were manned, to shoot back. In fact, they don't even have to shoot at our drones for us to be authorized to fire at them. They just have to turn on the targeting radar. That's enough. So the point is, these interesting legal ethical questions we're seeing right out of science fiction. In fact, a lot of them are. They're playing out in our real world, and they're playing out in lots of different places. Take face recognition, which, you know, you can see this across all of it. Face recognition is a technology that's being developed and deployed by the US military. There's, for example, a program that's creating a system for targeting and intelligence that will be able to face identify in the dark from a kilometer away. But it's also playing out in law enforcement, you know, everywhere from urban police departments like, you know, New York City to rural West Virginia, all have been deploying this. To the business side, face recognition has been deployed by, you know, everything from social media platform companies to Kentucky Fried Chicken has done a test of it. Now, of course, all this will, you know, be used to raise security, but it also, you know, when you've got a world of Big Brother, or in that case, Big Colonel, it opens up some really interesting and scary questions of privacy. The final thing, though, is that we have new security questions, and they come out of not just this issue of privacy, but how in a world that's wired, every single device out there lashed up. So the internet moves from being about us communicating to things operating, whether it's your smart home, whether it's a smart car, a smart city, a smart military base, you name it. you have each of them collecting information, operating via the networks. So you get a panopticon that can map your entire life history, not just your past, but your present, but then add in AI and it allows you to do projection, prediction of activity, and even influence and shaping. And just like those sensors, some of them will be visible. It might be ads popping up at you, and some of them will be invisible. Might be subtle shifts that you don't even notice, the way you're routed a certain direction, or information warfare elements to it that swirl around you and you don't even notice. But that means we also have other types of security questions. One, for the people particularly interested in cybersecurity, we are on the cusp of seeing a shift from the problem being about information theft, which has been tough enough, whether it's theft of intellectual property, how to build your own version of our jet fighter, to theft of financial information, stealing your credit card numbers. That's been the problem of cybersecurity mostly. Now we will see breaches that go after this Internet of Things and cause physical change in the world. Not to plot spoil too much, but an example of this would be what hit Israel just a couple of weeks back, where hackers went after their water authority and sought to change the chlorine level of the water that people would have come out of their pipes. To go to the book project, if you think that small business and local government water treatment facilities in the US have better cybersecurity than the Israeli government, I have really bad news for you. So we play with that in the book. But you also go back to that first issue of all that political economic change. You get new ideologies and maybe even new violent movements, or maybe they're a return to old violent movements. During the last Industrial Revolution, for example, we had the rise of the Luddites. Now we would call them the equivalent of a terrorist or insurgency. They would assassinate factory owners. These are the early factories in the 1800s. They would ambush on the road. They would launch these pitched street battles. And ultimately, the level of violence rose to such that more of the British military deployed to crush the Luddites than deployed to fight the US military in the War of 1812. Kind of puts us in our place when we think about what they thought was a problem back then. Now, while we have these three big issues to figure out, we also have three challenges in how we figure them out. One, when we do think about it, we think about it as being way off in the distant future. For example, the Secretary of the Treasury said that it's, quote, not even on our radar, end quote, because the issues of AI and automation are not going to be something that we really have to care about for, quote, 50 to 100 more years away, end quote. Obviously, that's, I believe, self-evidently wrong, not just what's happening in the near term, but what's already happened. For example, 85% of manufacturing jobs that were lost over the last couple of decades were lost to automation, not to outsourcing or the like. That's what the data is. We may not like it, but that's what it is. The second issue is when we do talk about, strangely enough, for a field that's about networks, they are disconnected. They're stovepiped. The people who care about, for example, the future of work are different from the people who care about the future of war. The people who care about cybersecurity and Internet of Things are different than, for example, the people that care about the legal and ethical questions that we talked about. And then finally is a wonderful, strange irony. We are on the 100-year anniversary of the creation of the word robot. And it was actually in this play that you see a scene of from 1920, RUR. And ever since, our concept of robot has been that idea of a mechanical servant who wises up and then rises up. And that story of a rebellion of the robots, cut through from RUR in 1920 to the Terminator, the Matrix, you name it. Now, it'd be fine if that, stayed in fiction, except it shapes the real world. And we see it shape everything from, for example, the predominance of the debate over killer robots, which has, shaped everything from Pentagon policy to then a debate about it on the floor of the United Nations, to it's shaped research and investment. They've, in particular, Silicon Valley billionaires have actually invested over $5 billion. And what do we do about the existential threat of robot uprising? My argument is, maybe one day we're going to have to debate whether we fight the robots or salute our metal masters. But in the here and now, and for the next couple of decades, when you and I are alive, it's not a revolt of the robots, it's robotic revolution that we have to figure out. And that is the challenge. And part of the challenge on top of that is that we don't understand it all that well. Not just anecdotes like the saying it's far away, but they did a poll of leaders, and only 17% of them said they have even passing familiarity with the issues of AI, let alone the dilemmas that it will provoke. And that's self-reporting. That's leaders, if they're saying 70% say, I think I get it, it's probably lower. That is a massive disconnect when you think about the importance of it, again, in everything from national defense strategy to business strategy. So that's what we're after with the BurnIn book, but we're trying to go after it in a new kind of way. BurnIn, the title is taken from the concept from the engineering field of when you deliberately push a new technology to the breaking point in order to learn from it. So for example, when you take a new watch underwater to see how deep can it go. In this case, BurnIn is a new kind of book. It is a novel that is also a work of nonfiction. That is, it's a smash up of the two. It's a techno thriller. It's a story in which you follow a veteran turned FBI agent who's hunting a new kind of terrorist through the streets of Washington, D.C. Of the future. But at the same time, it is a work of nonfiction in that baked into the story is over 300 explanations and predictions drawn from real world research with 27 pages of endnotes to document that's when they're from. And so it might be micro details about the world to come, two characters talking, and in the distance, a certain type of drone, a delivery drone flies overhead, and then it'll have the endnote and it'll show you, hey, that's not what Singer and Cole, my co-author on it, dreamed up. How they just described it, that's Amazon's patent for it. Or it might be a concept that we all need to know, something complex like algorithmic bias, which has struck everything from war to parenting to if you work in banking or medicine. This is an issue that's hitting all of these fields. It's really, really complex. Most of us are not going to read an academic white paper on it. So we depict and explain it through a scene in which our character is an FBI agent trying to find a terrorist in a crowded train station. So notice what I just said. You can kind of already visualize that, and hopefully your pace, your pulse quickened a little bit. Oh, where's the terrorist in the train station among the crowd? That's the power of combining fiction and nonfiction. So the idea of the project is to entertain. For some people, hopefully it's just a good escapist summer read. We definitely need that right now. But for other people, it's to inform and to equip them to navigate this world to come. And I think the result of that is why it's gotten such a strange, wonderful mix of early endorsers. Everything from people on the defense side, the former heads of NATO, the U.S. military, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Marine Corps, CIA, NSA, the business world, the head of LinkedIn, but also the fiction world, creators of projects like Lost and Watchmen and the new Star Trek movies. These are not people that normally come together on the same project, but I think it's because of this double layer nature of it. So it's come out literally yesterday. It's really exciting to be able to talk to you about it, and I'm happy to answer questions about all this. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. That's fantastic. I feel compelled, not just because nobody asked questions, because I see Joe Grove's got his hand up, and one of our students, previous students, graduates, has a question in the Q&A box. But I want to take the prerogative of being the first to ask a question in this situation, because it's really, I'm engaging my students now in my current course on this topic with regards to technology. American culture seems to be sort of, at least in my upbringing and my youthful years, as a culture, we are technological optimists. But if there was a problem out there that needed to be solved, we Americans certainly had the wherewithal to do that, and that technology would address the problem before it became, something that was critical to human life or to the U.S. power. Even the current pandemic, there's a certain amount of technological optimism involved with how quickly we can come to get a vaccine because of modern technology, CRISPR, and a whole host of other, computing issues. And yet you hear more and more and more every day about this fear of technology. I kind of want to know where you fall on that. Let's just put that on a continuum. Where do you fall on that continuum of technological optimists versus the fear of new technology?
So I hope that I'm a realist on that spectrum. It's kind of a dodge. I recognize saying that, but basically my take is that every single technology, and technology just means tool. Every single technology from the very first one to today has had good and bad effects and has been used by good and bad people. The first technology was the stone. Someone picked it up, and we don't know whether they first used it to, grind some nut to get at the good healthy stuff inside, or maybe they just used it to bash someone else over the head. To drones, and definitely it's been a center of study for the ASU Center. Drones have been applied into war, and whether you think they're good or bad kind of depend on which side of the battlefield you were on. Mm-hmm. But they're also, they've been applied into war to stop war crimes. There's a human rights group right now using drones to literally today to talk about this idea of things speeding up. Was a news story that crossed my screen of using drones to deliver coronavirus tests to a rural hospital to get them out there and back in 1/5 the time. So you've always had good and bad. I think what's interesting, and you talked about sort of that unique American, but it's particularly, that unique American place, Silicon Valley. What's troubling us right now is, and this is very much a theme in BurnIn, is the fine line between utopian and dystopian views of the future. And it's hard to figure out not just which one we're in, but which one they're building. So just into the couple, look, I wake up in the morning and I have a algorithmically shaped news feed that pushes me information, and it's pushed me, stories, and sometimes stories that are really advertisements masquerading that way, about everything from a smart toilet to pandemic drones, which are ones that are going to monitor your temperature from afar, to movement tracking apps on a phone that, oh, by the way, we'll share it with Foursquare. And again, I didn't make that up. That's actually, happened. And all the, you go with the smart toilet, and it's going to, help you figure out whether you're sick or not, share it with doctors. It totally redefines, can I get some privacy? And so, I think part of the challenge of it is that there's been they call it the tech lash. We put Silicon Valley up on a pedestal, and they were massively praised and too much praised. And now the very natural pendulum swung the other way, and we're seeing them, kind of attacked for a lot of different things. And that was just a natural thing of the pendulum. But I think it's also the concern that there's very real systemic problems that they've still not gone after, whether it was, they've not learned the lessons of what played out in the 2016 election and their role in helping to allow and amplify extremism and Russian government disinformation campaigns, to what's happening right now, the accompanying infodemic of the pandemic that's spread mis and disinformation about coronavirus and remedies to it. And it's literally gotten people killed, not just small numbers. The pandemic has clearly gone wider than it should have in America, in part because of mis and disinformation online. And so why they don't still get it, I think, are some systemic issues. One is that it's the attribute of their techno-optimism. They are problem solvers. They are optimistic. They can solve problems. That's where we get all the great stuff. But it also means sometimes they look at really complex socioeconomic issues and say, oh, I've got the instant answer to it. The second thing, and they're complex for a reason. And so the second thing is they don't red team. They don't remember, what a Clausewitz would advise. There's fog, there's friction, the enemy gets a vote. So they roll out the product without, saying, okay, how is the bad guy going to use it? How is the bad guy going to go after the vulnerabilities of it? And then the third thing, and part of red team, is about alternative perspectives. The third thing is they still have a diversity problem. And so it's a community that tends to have a particular kind of background, white, male, upper middle class upbringing, who went to a limited number of majors at a limited number of American universities. And when you roll out a technology like face recognition, it has very different play if you're from a different country, from a different economic spectrum, et cetera. So that all those are issues, but they're also remedy. You can solve some of them and come out better on the utopian side.
Interesting. Wow, that's great. All right, let's get to some of the questions and the question answered. I'll get to Joe. I'll get to you in just a second, but I'm going to ask one of the questions. John Weed, a graduate of the MAGS, a couple years back, one of the first graduates, in fact. He asked a question about how prevalent is the use of AI drones by the Chinese PLAN in the South China Sea. Actually, more of a question for your Ghost Fleet novel maybe than this, but how has that changed maybe since you've written Ghost Fleet to now? What have you seen in terms of trends, especially in regards to the South China Sea?
Yeah, so what's interesting is, so the Ghost Fleet project, for those who are not familiar, it was a novel looking at what a war between the U.S. and China might be like, but it drew from research. Now, it wasn't like BurnIn in that we didn't start it from the beginning with that research concept in mind. It was more about us sort of showing our work, documenting it, versus BurnIn. It's very much from the very start. Even the choice of character identity was with that idea of blending in fiction and nonfiction. But still, the rule for Ghost Fleet was the same as BurnIn, that it has to be drawn from the real world. And as you're asking there, one of the things that there was technologies and settings in it that, so we're researching it back in 2013, 2014. The book comes out in 2015, and things that seem really futuristic are now becoming real. We see all sorts of actors with not just drones, but increasingly autonomous drones. China has multiple different programs for this, just like the US military. Some of them are physically large in size, surveillance ones that are, the size of a passenger jet, to they're also doing work on small, cheap, disposable swarming type technology. they have a series of, they're organized under military districts, different sort of geographic location. And one study found, yes, every single district, including the one that bumps up to contested areas like the South China Sea, have unmanned aerial systems deployed into them. The interesting question is, going back to that like legal issue, what happens when unmanned systems start to deploy and get into trouble back and forth? What happens when a Chinese drone accidentally crashes into a Japanese air self-defense force plane, or vice versa? And these are seemingly sci-fi, now real questions. But one of the funny things is, like, literally today, news story popped of the other part of it, something from Ghost Fleet 5 years back that seemed sci-fi, counter drone technology. There's a US Navy system that we have in the Ghost Fleet book that just deployed today, that is a laser to shoot down drones. Right. And so, what's fun / scary to me is, so that was 5 years back, and then the system deploys today. So what is it that is in BurnIn today that 5 years from now we'll see the very same thing?
That is, like I said, that's, to me, in my mind, your primary skill set is being able to see those sorts of things, maybe 5 years in advance. Hopefully you're a little bit pessimistic in the way things turn out in a lot of cases. In any case, Joe Garreau, I'm going to push the allow to talk, see if he's there. There's no camera. You want to unmute yourself, Joel, and have a talk? Looks like you should have a mute button. There you go.
How's that?
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Peter. Hi, Jeff. Hey, Peter, can you talk about how you turn all this stuff into a compelling story by novelizing it? I'm especially interested in how you make human character and motivation central, as distinct from the machines.
Yeah. Because we call what we're doing useful fiction, or the technical term ficant for the people with an intelligence community background. You have these different tools of analysis and explanation and prediction. SIGINT, signals intelligence, human intelligence, human spies. Ficant is combining the power of narrative with the research. So it's not pure sci-fi. It's not, dreamy worlds. You have to do the research side, but you're building a narrative. And so you're doing both at the same time. And just like, the researchers and students, who are part of the program, the research might be, bringing together studies that are out there to, it might be interviews of experts. But as you're doing that, you're also building the world of fiction. And that involves world building, involves building a plot, scenes, characters. And what we've found is that the research, the realism side, actually helps very much with the fiction side and making it more compelling. It might be the way people in the real world are not one-dimensional. They have multiple identities. So the main character of this story, and again, this is a big difference for fiction, for techno thrillers. It's a she. It's a female veteran turned FBI agent. Most techno thrillers, actually, it's hard to, I can't even think of one right now. When they do have a female character, she's the 1B. She's the helper. You think of the Dragon Tattoo or Red Sparrow or whatever. But it's not just that. They tend to be one-dimensional. In our case, our main character, like people in the real world, she's got these different identities. She's an FBI agent. She used to be a veteran. She's a mom to a 5-year-old. She's a spouse. Her marriage is falling apart. And each of those identities, like in the real world, they juggle, they duel with each other. They pop up, something from your personal life affects how you operate at work, or vice versa. That's how it is in the real world. The research, though, may allow you to make something seem more real, but also, again, make it more compelling. When we looked at the job automation data, one of the things that is not well understood is that it's not just going to be, factory jobs or truck drivers. It's hitting white collar jobs. And so that's hard data. It's numbers. We turn that into a character. Her husband is a contract lawyer, which is a field that makes around $200,000 a year right now. It's on the trend line to being massively reduced by AI. Now, you have that data in the report. What makes it feel real, but I think compelling in the fiction sense, is go, okay, what does it mean for someone who, got good grades, went to the right law school, and then it was taken away from them, and they're working a gig job from home? How does it affect their marriage? How does it affect the way they parent? How does it affect the political identity? And so again, you can see the world building. Other times it might just be little details that you come across in the real world. And you go, that's going to be so cool in a story, or flesh out the story. The first time I went to the National Security Council and then later on the White House, one of the things that it's strange to say, but this, we're humans, is the way we operate. The floor in the old executive office building, my shoes made this kind of small squeak because they're this kind of marble thing. And in my head, even though I'm going to the NSC, I'm thinking, I hope the escort doesn't hear my shoes squeak. And then when we crossed over into the White House, the floor, the rugs there are thick. And I got this sense of relief to be in the White House where my shoes didn't squeak. That's a personal experience. That is like a little detail that then our character has that same experience. And so, again, I feel like it makes it more just like, oh, she walked into the White House, to like, she's thinking in her head, oh, it's stop squeaking shoes. So that, I hope that gives you a sort of a sense of what the world building back and forth. One last thing that you bring up, Joel, that's really interesting, that's a real world issue, is one of the other, I put in quotation mark, characters is a robot, is TAMS, but we never say it's a character. It's a technology, but you, the reader, and other characters can't help but thinking of it as a character because of the real world issue that we have of we always put our emotions on top of these intelligent machines. And that's a whole other issue that, again, we have to figure out, and everything from policing and military. I came across this for a past book where military units where the robots were supposed to keep them from taking risk. And one case in Iraq, there was a ground robot, a packbot that got stuck in the mud, and someone ran out under heavy machine gun fire to rescue their robot. The exact opposite of the idea of why we're using unmanned systems. And this was in 2005, I think. Don't hold me to that year. It's with a robot that's remote controlled, doesn't speak, doesn't look like a human, and yet it was affecting people that way. What about, move forward 5-10 years to, again, all those issues, your kids' toys. How does it affect that? How do they connect to it in ways that you'll be like, oh, that's exciting, in ways you'll be like, I don't like that. So that characterness is another thing of like the fiction and the nonfiction going back and forth.
That's a really interesting story. Thanks, Joel, for the question. We've got a lot of good questions on the.
You know what? I'm giving super long answers, so I'm gonna, let's ask them, and I'll give like short answers to them.
All right, great. But I'll tell you, screen name Mariah Murray. I don't know who that is, but has asked several questions. But the one I find most intriguing, so I'm going to ask it on her behalf or that person's behalf. Is there a Moore's law specific to AI?
There are arguments as to whether there is or not, and not just Moore's law, but the sort of compounding effect into what's called the singularity. Moore's law was originally just looking at chips, and then other people said, no, it applies roughly to technology breakthroughs. Then there are those who say, well, because it's AI, it actually speeds it up. because then the AI joins into the speeding up of it. What you basically see, though, is at a certain point, those debates with, in particular, the singularity movement, cross between research and study and faith-based debates. So, the endpoint for them is like, and then at some point we'll be able to upload ourselves into our machines. And you're like, well, self, what it means to be a human. That's a debate that's like has religious tones to it, or the light, consciousness. What does that mean? Also, they tend to, again, not be multidisciplinary. So, yes, Moore's law or this effective advancing, they look at, that's one way you can look at it, but we also have the intervening effects of everything from business investment to war to pandemics, which again means that the technology trends don't kind of have a nice perfect curve. They tend to, slow, and then they have massive jumps. Think of the effect of World War II on, all of the advancement.
Right.
So that's that. And that's sort of linked to was that Mariah's? Oh, I lost it. Yeah. Mariah's question was there, which was like, how do you document what gives job loss versus overall value?
Right.
That's again what these studies try and go after. And again, they tend to be disparate. One group looks at job loss, another group looks at value creation. And again, this is where I find the William Gibson, who's a science fiction writer, so useful to us on the flip side, which is he talks about the futures here. It's just unevenly distributed. The uneven distribution of it is, right, I think, the key. That yes, there will be massive economic winners, particularly those who benefit from the network and the data gathered, but there are clearly going to be other losers. So saying that it all evens out in the end, one person making $1 billion and a bunch of, we have to crunch the numbers real quick, but other people either losing their jobs or working for less than $15 an hour, or being under the hamster wheel of a gig type project. Right. That doesn't mean it evens out. Society has to deal with that uneven distribution.
Yeah, the hiding aggregate numbers tend to hide quite a lot. One of the other participants asked that to advance further in AI, we need 5G infrastructure. And yet we are nowhere close to having that infrastructure, really. Do you have any comment on this?
Yeah, that's another theme that we play with in the book, is that what does it mean to live like in the United States where the infrastructure is not world leading, and in fact, incredibly brittle. And we are starting to feel the effect of that. So we move the timeline forward, and you again get this sort of unevenness where there are some parts of the US that are lashing up and benefiting from this advancement, including, getting 5G. And then there's other parts that are not. And what does it mean to sort of go between those two spaces?
Yeah, it's going to have a kind of balkanization effect, even within the United States, not just across the globe, as other technologies have kind of done. So I think that's an interesting point. Let's see, Brian Johnson, you've had your hand up for quite some time, but if it's a question you've posed in the Q&A block, how about if I just ask it in the interest of time? Brian asks, what impacts have you seen from Ghost Fleet, and what impact do you see from hope to see from BurnIn? In other words, ramifications from those who have read and thought through it. What do you see?
Yeah.
From or would you like
part of what drove us on BurnIn was this just amazing experience of the real world impact from Ghost Fleet. I've done a series of nonfiction books, and they've done well, and they've been on the military reading lists and had certain policy impact. Ghost Fleet beat them all in policy impact. It was the one that got me invited to go to the White House Situation Room and have squeaky shoes, not squeak in the White House. It was the one that got me invited to the tank, the Joint Chiefs meeting room in the Pentagon. All told, over 75 different government organizations to military units, 82nd Airborne, JSOC, to multiple investigations were sparked by that book, both Defense Department and GAO investigations. And that's sort of just an aside. That's one of the great things of this blend, is that you don't just get prediction. Hopefully you get prevention. This goes to you, right?
Right.
You get people maybe fixing the problems that you point out. The Navy even named a $3.6 billion program, Ghost Fleet. So with BurnIn, it just came out yesterday, but we've already been sharing it with certain groups and entities. And I've already done briefings on its real world lessons for NATO, the US Air Force. I could go on multiple different, to one part of it is actually woven into this Congressional Cyber Solarium Commission report. Mm-hmm. It's a first for both US government documents and science fiction to have this in the official report. So our hope is one, that Ghost Fleet-like effect of maybe helping predict, but for other prevent, the nightmare scenarios we talk about from coming true. Mm-hmm. But more broadly, I hope that it equips both leaders and people working, whether it's in military intelligence community or just at banking or medicine, whatever. I hope it gives them the ability to visualize this world to come, the vocabulary that they need mm-hmm. in order to thrive in it, and that's my hope. But at the same time, I just hope a lot of people have a really fun escapist read, particularly given everything going on.
Right. You've already contributed quite extensively, and I apologize, folks. We're out of time now, so there's several questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure if Zoom will allow me to capture those later. I'll see what I can do. Email me if you've got a question, and I can forward it to Peter. But if you've got, you have contributed enormously to the MA in Global Security already through your contributions, both for as lectures in some of the classes, but also in guiding two of the classes on cybersecurity. We really do need to build a course around AI in particular, and maybe use this book as a backdrop to that, but really get folks up to speed in AI. So that would be, I think, going forward, that maybe one of the contributions that I seek to try to extract from you, if you will, or get you to contribute to going forward for the MA in Global Security. So Peter, we do sincerely appreciate your time. Best of luck with the sales, and I can't wait to see your next project, because the glimpses of the future I'm getting are a little darker. I'm kind of hoping for something a little more upbeat next time.
Well, so first I want to end by thanking you again and everybody for joining up. But the other thing, the great thing about fiction, even if it's dystopian fiction, which I don't know if this really is, but it's always a story of perseverance. Right. You always follow on a journey, and that's what we're living through right now. And we're all the hopeful when the story of this period is told. Hopefully, we're the heroes in that story, right? Yeah. Whether it's what we do individually that's right. I think of my kids. Like my kids are heroes in the story. They're giving up, school and sports teams to keep their grandparents safe. Yeah. And so I hopefully that's part of what.
And I'm with you 100%. That's the source of human optimism is actually the source is the human spirit itself. So I appreciate that contribution. Peter, thank you so much.
I want to thank everybody for joining out. And if you want more about the book, the link's in there, burninbook.com, and you can check it out. All the great online places available for books to safely get and enjoy it. But most of all, thanks, Jeff, for being such a kind host and the like. So take care, everybody.
Anytime you can spare the time, we'll have you aboard. Thanks, Peter, and goodbye to all. Thank you so much.